Thank you everybody for coming. It's fabulous for the students to have such a big audience here to watch them and see what hard work they've been doing over the semester. My name is Lyria Bennett-Moses. I work here in the UNSW Law and I am teaching the course Design and Technology Solutions for Access to Justice, whose students will today be giving us their presentations. Before I go any further, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Bedegal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to extend that acknowledgement to any other Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people here today. And I don't just mean that as a token statement. Megan Davis and colleagues here at UNSW have been involved with the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and I really urge everybody who hasn't already read it to read the words written by Indigenous people from around the country, rather than just relying on media reports. Before I go any further, just comfort stuff. The bathrooms are out, down the corridor and sort of on the left. It's a really confusing building, so everything's angular, but hopefully that's enough to help you find it. This is being recorded. I've already told the students, but for anyone else in the audience who particularly does not want to be recorded, Patrick on the camera there is happy to take requests. It's very hard, obviously, to avoid backs of heads and things, but if you particularly don't want anything you say to be on the video, then please let him know. So what else is there? Oh, food at the back, drinks at the back. Feel free to wander up and down as we go. And then there'll be a bit of a break while the judges go off and make their decision. So that will be another chance to mingle. Can I just say, some people are here, but just wanted to express a number of thank yous. First of all, to everyone who came out and helped teach the students. Pauline LaRocca from Creative Catalyst, Kate Fazio from Justice Connect, Peter Donkins from Gilbert and Tobin, all of the mentors who came out from Gilbert and Tobin, Gareth Canton, who is somewhere, I saw a second, yep, there we go, here, as well as his colleagues Lloyd Wood and Rebecca Ching, Graham Greenleaf and Philip Chung from Osley, and of course Kenji, where's Kenji gone? At the back, Yamada from Neota. So everyone who came and was involved in the course, that was absolutely fantastic. Also the organisations that have initiated the 4 projects you will hear about tonight, Kingsford Legal Centre, the Diplomacy Training Program, Redfern Legal Centre and Benigi. But our biggest thanks, particularly this evening, is to our 3 fabulous judges who've come out and agreed to judge the different teams this evening. And also from the 3 organisations that have made this course possible. So starting out from Gilbert and Tobin, and Gilbert and Tobin is the sponsor for this course, Sam Nicholas, who is over there. He is partner and chief operating officer at Gilbert and Tobin. He is responsible for their operational functions and plays a leadership role in the development and implementation of the firm's overall strategy. With a focus on technology and innovation, Sam drives the firm to challenge the status quo, particularly in relation to the delivery of legal services. He represents the firm on the board of Legal Vision, a technology-based startup partly owned by Gilbert and Tobin. So thank you very much, Sam, for coming. And then on the other end is Vedna Jivan from UNSW Law. So Vedna is the director of the new PLT, so that's Practical Legal Training Program, that will be launching almost certainly here at UNSW Law, having just got approved by Faculty Board, so that's a major achievement this week, and she has still found time to come here and help judge this evening. So that will launch in 2020. Vedna is very interested in social justice, as well as emergent technologies in legal education and professional practice, and is working to ensure these are firmly embedded in the new PLT program. And last but absolutely not least, in the middle, Julian Ubergang from Neota Logic. So he runs the Asia Pacific region for Neota Logic and has a background in law and technology. So as you can see, we've got 3 excellent judges. I want to make this very clear to all of them, as well as to everyone in the audience, that the judging is independent of the assessment. So the assessment, like everything else in the university, has criteria. It's done by me, and the students that I've talked through that. The judging, on the other hand, is really just who impresses. That can be a combination of the application and the presentation. And I've told them as well that this is all contextual in the sense that each of you had a different project that you were given, so you're not assessed on what project you started with, but you're assessed on how you executed it and how you presented the solution. So the format, each team is going to have 15 minutes to give their presentations. Because this is also an assessment, Everyone from every team is going to present. So if you're wondering why everyone's doing that, that's because they're being individually assessed by me. And that will be followed by 5 minutes of questions from the audience, so think of good ones. And so, without further ado, no, I'm not going to introduce all the students individually with full CVs because we'll be here all night. I will just introduce them as teams. So we'll start with Redfern Legal Centre.
Sarah. Good evening, everyone. Tonight I've got the pleasure of presenting to you our Music Festival Rights Advisor. In developing this app, we were partnered with the Redfern Legal Centre, who tasked us with creating an app that could inform young people of their rights when approached by police at music festivals. So from the very beginning of the design process, we had quite a young target audience in mind. So in order for me to illustrate to you the potential utility of our app, please allow me to walk you through the kind of scenario in which we hope we'll be able to assist users. So we have Amanda, a 19-year-old student at the University of New South Wales. She has decided to buy tickets to the upcoming festival, Splendour in the Field. Despite not having attended a festival before, Amanda can't wait to go. She's heard from everybody that they are crazy awesome. Upon entering the festival, Amanda is approached by a sniffer dog, which sits down next to her. Immediately, the police officer controlling the dog takes her to one side and informs her that he will need to conduct a strip search. He then explains this is because the sniffer dog has indicated that she is carrying an illicit substance. The officer and a nearby security guard take Amanda into a tent and ask her to undress for the search. However, the officer does not close the flap properly, and Amanda is worried that people outside may be able to see her. As the officer conducts the strip search, he pushes her legs further apart and grabs her hands in order to raise her arms up. 5 minutes later, the search has been concluded, and the officer has not found any drugs. He tells Amanda that she can now get dressed and instructs the security guard to take her back to the main festival. Once the guard has let her go, Amanda is feeling shocked and rattled by her search. She decides to leave the festival and go home. Sitting in her room later that night, Amanda can't believe that she was treated like that and wants to know if police are really allowed to behave in that way. People who find themselves in these kind of situations often feel hurt and confused by what has happened. So we really wanted to design an app that could quickly and painlessly explain to people if their rights may have been impinged on by police. In developing our app, we were conscious that situations like this can be incredibly nuanced, with a number of different factors influencing them. So we felt that the best way to deal with this kind of issue would be to design an app as an expert advisory system. This would allow us to present the relevant laws and regulations in an easy-to-read way to the user, in a way that would be tailored to their experience. We felt this would allow the user to easily identify if the police had overstepped, empowering them to make a complaint or to go and seek further legal advice. We also wanted to take advantage of the platform to educate the user on their rights in these situations in general. We thought that by educating young people in advance, we could hopefully help people like Amanda before they find themselves in situations like this. In order to try and make the application more educational, we inserted additional information throughout the app that would appear if certain questions were met with certain answers. Hopefully, this meant that the information presented to the user was more relevant and will result in the user being able to retain this information more clearly. I'll now hand you over to Anita, who's going to run you through how the app actually works.
Alright, so here we are on the front page of the app. It just has a little bit of information about what the application is for and also what the user can expect when they're going through the application. A little bit of information on Redfern Legal Centre, their contact information, and also the type of user which would benefit most from the app. So we've decided to break our app up into 3 sections. The first section will be some questions on eligibility, just to define the scope of the app. There'll be some information gathering questions as well in that section, just so that we can provide the correct legal information. The second section will relate to questions on the actual search themselves, split into before, during, and after. And then at the very end, Amanda can receive a customized report, which she can download with all the relevant legal information about her situation. So let's get started. So she has to accept a disclaimer statement from RLC. RLC has also requested that we do collect some user data. However, we have made it an option for Amanda to remain anonymous if she'd like, and for a final copy of the report to be emailed to her if she'd like. Alright, starting off with question 1. Age is a very important question in this situation, just because police are restricted by the types of searches they can do depending on the age of the person. So as Jack said before, Amanda's 19, so we're just going to pop that in. At the moment, the scope of our app only extends to people who have been searched at music festivals in the state of New South Wales. However, if someone does select no, we have provided a more general fact sheet with some basic information about their rights and also some tips and tricks about dealing with police. And this is in line with our aim to make the app slightly more educational as well. But in this case, Amanda has attended a music festival in New South Wales. So going on with the educational point, we've inserted these festival tips throughout the app, and just some basic information about what to do if police approach you or if police ask to search you. So at the moment, the scope of the app is only limited to people who were searched by police while attending the festival. So we're just going to press yes here because that's what happened. And just a bit of information about the reasonableness provisions. As a very subjective topic, it was hard to integrate that properly into all of the questions, so we just thought a little bit of information would be better than nothing at all. So we're going to go next. Sniffer dogs are something that a lot of festival goers do tend to encounter day to day. So while it's not an eligibility question, we thought it was still important to include it. And people who do select yes to this point will get some personalised information in relation to sniffer dogs. So here the information is mostly in relation to whether a policeman has reasonable grounds to search someone if a sniffer dog has made some kind of indication. At the moment, the scope of our app only extends to people who were searched before being arrested, just because there is a separate set of laws in relation to search after arrest, and we didn't really have the time to cover that scope. So we're just going to press no, because Amanda was searched and not arrested. Mental disability isn't a exclusionary factor, however, it does restrict the kinds of searches that police can conduct. So we've used these sort of pop-up links to kind of explain and clarify some terminology which may be a little bit confusing to the user, and we would provide maybe a definition or maybe examples of scenarios just to make sure that Amanda is going to be selecting the right thing. So Amanda doesn't have a mental disability, we're just going to press no. So this is the question that really determines the type of search that was carried out. So at the moment, the legislation splits it into general searches and strip searches. Just a bit of information on what inner layers of clothing may constitute, just so she can pick the right choice, because whether she presses yes or no here will depend on the types of questions that come after. So we're going to press yes because she was required to take off all her clothing. So here are the questions about the actual police conduct. We're starting off before the search. So a really, really good use of the app is that sometimes the app might be able to identify areas of the law where general people may not know that their rights have been impinged upon. So for example, while someone might know that the police must tell them like a reason for being searched, some people may not know that the police must also tell them why they have to remove their clothes. So for really nuanced, like smaller details like this, it would inform people like Amanda perhaps next time as well that where the police powers do lie. So we phrased all these questions in the negative just because we thought it would be easier for Amanda to identify what actually happened to her rather than to identify where police like may or may not have gone wrong or to identify what hasn't happened to her. So these are the questions in relation to during the search. Here's another really good example of the use of the pop-up links. For example, visible general public sounds really, really straightforward, but for example, scenarios like these, as in Amanda's situation, the police didn't close the flap of the tent door properly, do constitute a breach of police powers. So we've just identified different breaches in relation to during the search. We're just going to go through and click all the ones that apply to Amanda's case. some definitions of unnecessary people. So for example, the festival security guard, he wasn't supposed to be there, and what questioning might mean in this context. So these are the questions in relation to after the search. In particular, the last two, in relation to police stopping people from entering the festival and police confiscating tickets. These are contentious issues that have been in the media recently, and Redfern Legal Centre does deal with these issues quite a lot at the moment. So this app can also be used as an information gathering tool for the Legal Centre, just because there isn't any legislative basis for police not being able to do this at the moment, but it's the Legal Centre's belief that it is a breach of power if the police do stop someone from entering a festival because of a search or confiscate the ticket because of a search. So it also highlights some areas where people may not know that their rights are being breached by the police. But luckily in this case, none of the above happened to Amanda.
So once a user's session has ended, this page will pop up. The user can use the start over button at the top or the back button at the bottom to rerun the app or change their answers respectively. This page is basically the final report that is generated for the user. So if the user did not meet any of the eligibility requirements at the beginning of the app, the session will end immediately and this report will be generated for them. The reason for why the user couldn't progress through the app will be stated, but all the fact sheets and resources in this report will be displayed to them as well. This allows the user to still receive the important information and educate themselves on the police powers and their rights. For Amanda's case, she was able to make use of all the features of the app, and thus this is an example of a final full report. Based on Amanda's input, she was strip searched, and the definition for this type of search is provided. It was also concluded that she may have been incorrectly searched. So the reasons and potential grounds for her to make a police complaint are listed, with a specific legislation accompanying them. She can then click on the hyperlinks to see the exact wording of the relevant sections if she wants to. Amanda can also review the definitions. For example, to see what constitutes reasonable privacy, Amanda can mouse over it, like she did in the body of the report, and the definition will pop up. Also, if you notice, some of the explanations are starred in red. This is due to the relevant sections of legislation carrying disclaimers about reasonableness and as to police behavior and what is practicable in the circumstances. There is also information about sniffer dogs because Amanda indicated that she had interactions with one. A link to further reading is provided, and she can click on it because sniffer dogs, police powers in relation to sniffer dogs are still contentious in New South Wales. Amanda can also reach the Redfern Legal Centre through their contact information if she would like to speak to a solicitor. In terms of next steps for Amanda, Redfern Legal Centre has informed us that they are working on a police complaints system to supplement this app, so this can be incorporated later. But for now, there is a police complaint fact sheet that she can access to potentially make a police complaints report to the correct channels, such as the Law Enforcement Conduct Commission, the Commissioner of Police, or the New South Wales Council of Civil Liberties. Even though Amanda did not want to divulge any information, personal information, and did not want the report sent to her via email, which this app can do, she can download this report in either Word or PDF format. She can also access other resources and hyperlinks. So this marks the end of our application demonstration. Now I'll pass it on to Felicia, who will talk about our design process.
Okay, so Anita and Teresa have shown you how the app actually works. So what I'll be doing is going through the design process with you. When designing this app, we had this list of requirements in mind, particularly that we want the aesthetics to appeal to our target audience, which is youth, as well as to make the app readable for all users, particularly those with reading or with print disabilities. And this is the color scheme that we've gone with. Black background with contrasting colors that were not too bright or too dark, so that users will be able to read the text on it easily. And we also wanted to include photos, but we had two limitations. One is that we wanted to use photos that were free use. And another was that we didn't want to include any photos that were identifying. So in order to resolve that, we decided to do like a small collage of photos with the idea of a corkboard. So it allowed us to like use sticky notes to cover up any identifying bases. We also use colors to differentiate between different functions of text. For instance, if we want to provide educational information, we use pink. And then questions were in green and answer options were in blue. And this was particularly useful when it came to the end of the display report where there's a huge chunk of text. So we did the same thing. We used colors to differentiate between the information on the text. For instance, the options selected by the users will be in blue like this. And any text that had hyperlinks or pop-ups, we use yellow to make them more easily identifiable to users. So ideally, we want users such as Amanda to be able to exit the app feeling more informed about their rights pertaining to police searches at music festivals, as well as inform them of any further actions that they can take after the search. And this is the end of our presentation. Thank you all. Sorry. Are there any questions?
Okay, hopefully you filled with some questions. You have 5 minutes, so yes.
Yeah, you said the legal center is trying to gather information on this. What are they trying to do with the information that they get from this? Because I'm aware that there are very few test cases when it comes to the limits of police powers and strip searches.
Redfern Legal Centre just kind of wanted to get a bigger picture of what was going on out in the greater community, maybe beyond who was actually coming into the centre to actually talk to them in person. So they just wanted us to kind of add some additional qualifying questions to the app that would enable them to kind of realise, like, so with the questions about people being denied entrance to the festivals per se, they just wanted to know like how often that was happening, was a regular occurrence, if it was just a one-off thing, because the media can kind of tend to sensationalise those kind of things.
You said they sent a report, like the user consents and something like that.
Pardon?
Is Redfern Legal Centre sent a report about this?
So that's something, that's something they were trying to discuss with us, but we told them it was something we'd have to talk to Neota about. So essentially they weren't too interested in getting people's like names and email addresses and things like that, but they just wanted some statistics about how many people who were searched actually had their ticket confiscated, for example. So I think they wanted it as some kind of like spreadsheet or database, but that's beyond the scope of what we can do. So we just told them to speak to Neota. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
So my question is, because this is designed for like teenagers, like around like less than 20 years old, and then the report is like a lot of text. So I was wondering, maybe is it better to provide like a summary results of the report rather than let them read through every line?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to clarify, we may have used the word youths, but we see festival goers as mostly over 18 because a lot of events are over 18 events, especially if there are drugs involved. I would hope they're not under 18. So the target demographic would be people like us. So that was one of the things. You can get a downloadable copy of the report so you can kind of read through it slowly and clearly, but yeah, you do make a good point that maybe it might be a bit easier if there was like a smaller summarized version, but we just didn't get around to doing that.
But we do have a fact sheet that we compiled, and
Yeah.
it's based off, because Redfern Legal Center has their own fact sheets, but we created one specifically for this app, compiling their information. So you can just read that. It's just that the report has what you typed in, and then the relevant section for what you specifically said police did. That's why the huge chunk of blue was more relevant to individual circumstances. So if the police didn't do a lot of incorrect behavior, then there won't be too much text, but just additional resources.
Yes.
Question I want to ask is that, from what I understand so far, this app is actually for people actually who are trying to find out actually whether they've been searched correctly after the search itself. Why don't you guys focus on the the solution where the person that is currently being searched is able to access it quickly to actually identify what kind of search is within the limits of the police. Because after this strip search where this person has been has feel violated, where the power is exercised wrongly, there's not much, there's some sort of remedy that can be sought after, but the damage has been done already. So it's like, why would you have a different focus?
That's a really, really great suggestion, but we worked mainly based off what RLC was looking for, and they were essentially looking for like an advisory system that could be used before these people come to speak to a solicitor. So it was more of an after the fact kind of app. So we based our design off what the Legal Centre was looking for, and although it definitely is useful to have like a real-time app, like, oh my god, is the police doing this correctly? That just wasn't the scope of our brief, so that's why we did it this way.
Yeah. So I can imagine they'd be saying, if somebody comes into the RLC and says, I think I've been searched incorrectly, you could say, well, why don't you just sit down and go through this, and then
exactly.
it could speed up that whole process.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things we did end up suggesting was that if someone chooses to download or keep the report, they can actually like print it off and bring it into the RLC, which is why we asked questions like, were you arrested, or were drugs found on you? Those aren't breaches of police powers, but it's just contextual information that would help RLC help them later on.
I suppose they just rely on almost viral communication from there and people telling their mates, if you
Yeah.
get searched, this is what your rights
Exactly,
are, right?
yeah.
I don't think the cops are going to like it if you just say, pull yours.
Yeah.
The centre was kind of hoping to use this app in conjunction with a campaign they're running at the moment. So rather than kind of piggyback onto that.
About knowing
publicity.
your rights.
Yeah.
Sort of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you guys. So we have a little bit of, I think, we'll be reshuffling computers and because time. So our next group has been building an application for Benigi, and we're very lucky to have Eve Lester here today to actually see what's been done.
Okay, we would like to acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional owners of the land that we're standing on at the moment, the Eora people of the Gadigal Nation. We pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. So good evening everyone, and thank you for coming. This is our app KID, KID standing for Conditions of Immigration Detention. So our application has been the product of a collaboration with our team and Eve Lester, who is right in front of me, sorry. So Eve is a human rights consultant who has done research and consulted on a range of issues, including human rights, migration, and refugees. So, and in our team, in my team, or our team, there's also Christine, Lauren, and Kate, and unfortunately Sam's not here today, but also part of the team. So our brief, Eve came to us with an idea of designing an app that would gather information and provide information about conditions in immigration detention centres around the world. This came off the back of Eve having prepared a manual called the Monitoring Immigration Detention Practical Manual for the UNHCR. This manual provides guidance on monitoring immigration detention centres. When we received this brief, we were very excited because we were clearly embarking on an important and ambitious project. We were conscious that it was an ambitious project, and so we would need to narrow the scope to ensure that we could complete our app within the time frame. Working alongside Eve, we decided this prototype would focus on material conditions in detention in Australia, specifically accommodation, food, sanitation, clothing and bedding, and cash and possessions. We chose material conditions because these were the most straightforward and easily implementable, most easily implemented into our app, giving us more time to work on the app's functionality. We selected Australia as our prototype country because we could most easily access Australia's reporting mechanisms and direct our users to the necessary ones. Cool, so I'll just give you guys a bit of context about our project so that you can understand sort of why we've chosen to work on monitoring conditions of detention and also its importance in that context.
So for those who aren't familiar with immigration detention centres in Australia, it is a system where non-citizens without a valid visa, or otherwise those who are not allowed to live in the Australian community, are detained in an immigration detention facility until a decision is made to either grant a visa and release them into the community or to deport them. You can see a breakdown here of who is in immigration detention at the moment on our donut graph. The biggest demographic is people with cancelled visas, and the second biggest group is asylum seekers who have arrived to Australia by boat. How long are people in immigration detention? So whilst the overall number of people in detention has declined, in recent years, since 2012, the average period of time that people are spending in immigration detention has increased significantly, by 300% since 2012. So this means that understanding who and how long people are in detention is important so that we can realise why an app like this is so incredibly important and it's a human rights issue that we need to address. So what are some of the issues that people report in detention? So as you may know from the media, there are a range of human rights issues that are reported in immigration detention, including the arbitrary and protracted nature of detention, mental health issues, the lack of access to physical and mental health services, exposure to incidents of unrest and self-harm, and of course their physical conditions. So Australia's immigration detention policy and practice has been condemned internationally for breaching various international human rights instruments to which it is a signatory, including the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the UN Convention Against Torture. So, how does AppKit address those issues and why is it important? AppKit provides users with an avenue to both document the conditions in immigration detention and access general information on the international human rights standards for these facilities. Detainees themselves can document their conditions in detention, and so can third parties, such as NGOs, community groups, visitors, and UN bodies. The idea beyond the scope of our prototype is that AppKit will allow us to collect data from around the world on the conditions of immigration detention. Having a central database like this, where information about the conditions of detention can be accessed, will therefore promote transparency and strengthen accountability of government and companies running those immigration detention centres. So in that sense, our broader and long-term purpose is to prevent human rights abuses and improve conditions of detention around the world. It's also important for us to address what our app doesn't do. So our app does not provide a reporting mechanisms for users, whether they be detainees or third parties. This means that individuals in particular will not be able to make a complaint through our system or resolve their individual issues or concerns using our app. As such, from the outset, we have made it very clear in our app on the homepage where you will see later that this is not a reporting mechanism. However, we have kept this in mind, and so to assist individuals who would like to make a complaint about conditions in detention, we generate a report at the end of the session, which they can bring to human rights bodies or government, and furthermore, we direct users to direct reporting mechanisms.
So our app has been designed with 3 users in mind. Firstly, detainees. Secondly, third parties, i.e. NGOs visiting detention centres, just general visitors to detention centres. And these 2 we couple together as our front-end users. And our third user are the people at the other end who are collecting the data that the app is collecting, and they're our back-end users. So going on to our front-end users, we've identified 4 key areas that these users need addressed in the application. The first is privacy. So you can see it going through the app while I talk. So we realized that by identifying themselves whilst using the application, people could be putting themselves at risk, depending on what they're reporting on and what jurisdiction they're in at the time. So we ask as few identifiable questions as possible, and the ones that we do ask are optional for the user to answer. Additionally, to receive the report at the end, they can either input their own email address, or if they decide not to, because this would put themselves at risk, they can input the email address of an NGO, a friend outside of detention, or alternatively not put an email address at all and have the report just on the screen. The next thing we felt the need to address was phone usage. Whilst in detention centres, people generally don't have much access to computers, both third parties and detainees using the application. So we optimised this application for a phone. To do that, we've put all of our questions in forms. So to minimise the number of times you have to cross over and click submit to get to the next question. Additionally, all of the questions are neatly underneath each other, all left aligned, so that it can be clearly read on the phone screen. Also, we've used hover over hints to allow a neat way of explaining complex terms without having big detailed hints underneath the question. The next thing that we felt we needed to address was time. This application covers an enormous amount of information, and because everyone is limited for time, including our users, we allow the user the option to select what areas they would like to cover, and we give them the list, and including an indication of how long each topic takes, approximately 5 to 10 minutes. And based on this, they can make an informed decision as to how they would like to address, on what issues they'd like to address. Additionally, at the end of the application, the report that's produced provides a lot of information. So the way we made it easily digestible in a short space of time is by putting it into a form, into a table where all these standards, the questions they were asked related to those standards, and the answers they gave that were related to those standards were next to each other, so people could easily figure out what was relevant to them. Additionally, as you can see here, there are alerts placed based on the answers that were given. If the answers given indicate that there may be a breach of human rights, we've put an alert there so people can draw their attention immediately to what needs to be, to what is most relevant to them. Lastly, and where our front-end users differ is education. Our detainees will have a variety of education levels. So we've made questions very simple and tried to use as basic and more common sense language. Whereas for NGOs visiting detention centres, generally they'll have a base level of information regarding the situation, and also will have more access to things like jurisdictional standards. So for example, on the screen you can see these two questions. The above one is directed at third parties. So if a third party user selects to address food, this deals with standards regarding kitchen safety. Whereas if an individual in detention were to go through this application, they would be addressed with this question, which is a more common sense understanding of health and safety, so that both can address them equally.
So our other set of users are our back-end users. So the back-end users are the people that are collecting the data, and then they'll be the ones utilising it, essentially. And that goes to one of our 3 goals, which is the monitoring of immigration, with conditions in immigration detention centres. So we attempted to strike a balance between ensuring that the front-end users had flexibility in their responses, being able to capture the nuance that can't really be captured by yes and no, but while also ensuring that our back-end users could rely on and utilise the data. So we did this in a number of ways. So to optimise the data, we broke down the international standards into multiple questions, to make the data more specific. We also preference quantifiable data like sliding scales and yes-no questions over text inputs to start standardise the information and allow back-end users to average the values. To maintain front-end user flexibility, we allow users to provide additional comments at the end of each section, and we alert users to this before they start commencing on answering the questions. So they're aware that when they come up with something like, oh, I'm not sure if that's quite what I meant, they will have opportunity to be more clear about it later. So the second issue is the verifiable data. So we're conscious that data collectors want the data to be authentic without compromising user privacy. So we did this through incorporating session IDs. So session IDs are a unique code which is generated for each use of the app. Every new session will have a unique code which will also be recorded on the report. Each subsequent use of the application gives the user the opportunity to input their old user ID. Session IDs allow users to corroborate their reports with the reports that are collected in the systems, as well as the reports that may be sent to third parties. It also allows users that plan to reuse the system at a later date for users that plan to use it at a later date, the session IDs help back-end users match the data and distinguish multiple entries that have been conducted by one individual rather than just assuming that they're all different users. So the session ID is a useful feature as it will allow back-end users to monitor conditions over time, particularly seeing how they might have changed. User testing. So whether we conducted user testing, we could only conduct limited user testing due to the privacy concerns with immigration detention centres. To overcome this, however, given the importance of user testing, we assumed personas of prospective users and tested the system with kind of made up scenarios and experiences. So we tried to put ourselves in the user's shoes, we tried to anticipate how they would understand and respond to certain questions, and how we presented the questions as well as information at the end. Our client and content expert, Eve, also ran through the app a number of times, testing its boundaries and also ensuring that the content was appropriate for our users. We had a number of friends and family also try the app, as we considered it important to have people outside the content creation process trying its features to ensure that it's logical and intuitive. After noting this feedback, we'd go back to the building process, implement the changes, and test again. And now, because Sam couldn't be here, but he has to present, you'll see a fun feature of him speaking in audio. So going beyond our app, where this is going to take us in the future. So as was stated at the start by Anna, this is a prototype app that's going to hopefully be built into something more fully fledged. So thanks, Sam.
As our group members highlighted earlier, there is scope for this application to be developed further. There are 4 areas where the application could be improved to better meet our objectives. First, our application will include other topics that are relevant to monitoring the conditions of detention centres. There are 36 other categories that would be relevant, including suicide, self-harm, welfare and counselling. Critically, future developers should consider how to include further topics without overloading users with information. An easy login, logout facility that accommodates their time constraints, as well as ensuring that the material is easily digestible, will assist in creating a user-friendly experience. Second, there are a few system limitations that we would hope a future version of this application could remedy. A key system limitation we identified was in relation to data optimization. Kate explained how our application was developed with the view of assisting authorities in optimising data collectible from the system. A future version of the application will be capable of directly exporting information generated from sessions into a central database. Another key system limitation is that it does not have the capacity to upload photos and videos. In a future version of the app, this issue would be remedied, as it would allow users to provide accurate depictions of their conditions in detention. Furthermore, users that wish to log in and out of the system are inconvenienced by having to potentially record multiple session IDs. A future version of the app will be capable of providing users with personalised login details, including a username and password. Personalised login details will also serve as a more convenient and reliable authentication tool than session IDs. Third, a more developed version of the application would be compatible for users based in every country in the world. The app would contain translated information and information on relevant feedback units, NGOs, and complaint mechanisms based in each country. There are also opportunities for a future version to include more culturally appropriate terminology to help users understand the various questions asked. Finally, a future version of the app will be able to manage the privacy and consent issues that are involved with assisting people under 18. The app is currently for people over 18, as there are complex privacy issues associated with involving this demographic that vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Overall, we are very excited to know that our application will be presented by Eve to potential sponsors in Geneva. We look forward to seeing how our application develops in the future. Thank you.
Okay, questions? Yes?
So I have a couple of related questions, or I think they're related. First is, so if my understanding is correct, the idea is for people that are currently in a detention center to use the app. Do you foresee any difficulties with people being able to know that the app exists and is available, and potential access problems while they're in detention? And then the second question is, if they do use it, do you think that there might be some difficulties with frustrations with people that expect there to be actions taken following them giving this information on the app when it seems to be more, at this stage at least, for data collection rather than sort of short-term action?
So I guess in relation to the first question, there'll obviously be difficulties because, you know, some detention centres ban mobile phones, for example. But I mean, that's kind of why we decided to go with phone use, because that's the best chance. And at the moment, I mean, there's obviously so little information available generally about conditions of detention, so if we can even provide a service that's available on the phone, I think that's probably one of the more common items that a detainee would have, whether or not the detention centre knows about it. So we've kind of tried to address that as much as we can, but that's obviously a limitation of the app. I guess something we would also look at in terms of like making people aware of it would be how we can get it to the top of Google searches and, you know, creating awareness through sponsorships and things like that. And in relation to the second question, frustration, yeah, that's something we've obviously discussed a lot, you know, like how can we make it of interest and how can people feel satisfied when they've used the app. And I think, unfortunately, that's something that's sort of a broader issue for people in detention because ultimately there aren't a lot of solutions out there. If you look at the reporting mechanisms in Australia, even they cannot necessarily provide concrete solutions. You can make complaints, but it might not change. So I guess we're trying to do the best we can to set up a system where there is more accountability indirectly, but yeah, we just have to, I think, keep thinking about how we can make it really clear to detainees that this is a long-term goal and that, yeah, I guess we'll try to keep connecting them as well as we can and update our services so that they have as much direct access to people who can help them, and maybe that's also establishing more partnerships and things like that.
And also to try and mitigate that frustration, we have included the report at the end, which ideally will, you know, they could print off and use that as their source of information to report to a mechanism. That's also why we've included, so by selecting what country they were in, we gave them the details of their local reporting facility, so in this case the Ombudsman, so that they could send that report through to the Ombudsman. It gives them quite clearly, you know, what their situation is, what the situation should be, and it you know, lays it out in a very digestible fashion that they can just use that quite simply. So they do gain something out of it. Unfortunately, you know, it's not an all service app, but it does provide them with something at least.
And just consistent with the course's theme, access to justice, at the very least it's an education tool. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there, I'm sure that everyone in this room, how familiar are you with the standards for human rights conditions in detainment centres? Like I didn't know anything about what actually standards are out there, and this is a really intuitive tool that kind of brings it all together and directs you to like the raft of conventions that are available that you just wouldn't know about otherwise. So I think its power as an a tool of education can't be really understated.
Yeah.
I was wondering if your session IDs will allow you to correlate third-party users and refugees to corroborate each other's reporting.
Yeah, that's the plan. That's what we hope to, because that was something that we kind of we grappled with a lot. How do we prove that this detainee, like without using personal information, how do you prove that this single detainee is the one that submitted this report? So that's kind of the whole purpose of our session IDs. Not perfect, as Sam kind of highlighted, but it's kind of what we could do with within the boundaries of the system.
Does the software, Julia, have the ability to take a geolocation or anything like that off the user?
Yeah, could do. Yeah, through an API call, but yeah, it's certainly something that would be an interesting addition.
Yeah, exactly. Because then you'd be able to pinpoint exactly where it's been done.
Yeah, we were joking that Peter Dutton would go on and say everything great.
Yeah. Geolocation. Just a quick question on the design. So one of the things you kind of talked about is testing with friends and family and the need, etc. When you had a lot of the questions kind of repetitively sequenced in one form as opposed to kind of a multi-step process, I'm just interested in, was that the feedback that you got, that was a more usable, better experience for the user, or how did you kind of go about that process?
The form was actually quite an early adaptation, because essentially what we found is that we have 400 plus variables in our app. So when you asked either one question at a time or just a few questions at a time, you'd be pressing next,
right.
next,
Yeah.
and it would take a longer time to load. There would be so many different factors about it that would just make it quite clunky, and just, you know, using it ourselves, that was really unpleasant, I guess, to use.
So one of the first things we did in that set was put it into a form, because it wasn't user-friendly for us as people who know how to use Neota. It definitely wouldn't have been user-friendly for others. So what we did do though is for some of the longer sections, we have split them up into 2 forms so that it doesn't scroll on forever. And we've tried to use follow-ups as often as possible, so we're really only asking the questions that are super relevant to the person using it.
Right.
So that's why we had the triage questions at the beginning, which specified what the sex of the user, specified
if they're pregnant,
mixed facility, if they're pregnant, and all of these things would then cull in questions.
So when you did the demonstration, that was one of the most complex avenues to get from start to end.
Yeah, so we didn't, we barely, exactly.
Yeah. And I think the form, like keeping them in the forms, while it seems like a lot of questions, I think you kind of have that tension still. Like I think if you didn't put it in forms, as Lauren's kind of been highlighting, the issue with next, and that's only 5 issues. Imagine another 36, you probably want them in forms per theme, so like per like sanitation, per food. It's difficult when the content is.
And it also makes it easier to go back and change your answers, and also down the bottom of the comment box, then you can see what you've said in relation to food, or for example, and then you can say, all right, I wanted to add more on this question, so I'll write it down the bottom.
Okay, cool.
Okay. We might have to wrap that one up so we can move on to the next group. Next group is BTP.
I think that was
HDMI is there.
Just be careful, because I've got here that there's a shipping country and on this side of the line. We're all right. Is that on yet? On yours or not? Sorry? Yeah. Yeah, just don't cross the line or something.
Okay, I said just don't sponsor. We'll just sit behind you.
Oh, that was the legal research, so she gave us like the...
That's the hardest part.
Yeah. And then we were able to write questions and answers already, and you just upload them to the app rather than having to. So that made it a little bit easier, but something to be said. And we didn't start building.
Careful with them. Don't cross the line.
Hello everyone, my name's Simon Moore and we're the Diplomacy Training Program group, and I'm going to be taking you through the problem and in part the solution that we provided to that. In order to lead you there, we have to ask 3 key questions. The first one being, who are Diplomacy Training Program? The second one being, what is the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration? And the third one are, who are migrants from Asia? So the Diplomacy Training Program. The Diplomacy Training Program was founded in 1989, and it essentially promotes and trains human rights advocacy and awareness across the globe, especially in Southeast Asia and MENA. They build capacity and understanding of this human rights, and to date they have trained over 3,000 advocates since 1990. The Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration was what they introduced to us, which is a global compact that was agreed upon being developed in New York in September 2016 by UN member states. A very swift 3 years later, they have now agreed on the 12th of July 2018 to the wording of that global compact, and it's going to be signed on the 10th of December. This global compact forms 23 objectives designed to improve and focus on the rights of migrant workers. The 23 objectives are not, in fact, however, legally binding. It's an intergovernmental agreement, however, it doesn't have the rigour or the strength that international law and international conventions have. To slightly deviate now, who are Migrant Forum in Asia? Migrant Forum in Asia are a partner of the Diplomacy Training Program and represent who our end user are in fact going to be. Migrant Forum in Asia do two things. They manage a variety of programs which they work with in combination with the diplomacy training program, as well as others, in addition to maintaining many networks, including Lawyers Without Borders, who they have a strong connection with, Asian Media for Migrant Workers, and Asian Parliamentarians for Migrant Workers. This networking, as Joel will talk about later, is very relevant to us. So what we have is we have the client, DTP. We have the problem, which is the Global Compact itself, which is not necessarily a legally binding document. And we have the end users who would seek to use the Global Compact to advocate for migrant workers in their environments. So what we decided to do, and what DTP gave us the brief on, was to identify these objectives, to link them with the Human Rights Law Conventions and the International Labour Organization Conventions, and then seek to link this set objective with relevant articles to reinforce for these advocates in their variety of locations. Just to give you a bit of a heads up on this, that was 16 human rights conventions, which consisted of 584 articles, which meant that it was approximately more than 12,000 different possible comparisons that we had to do. I'm now going to hand over to Daniel, who's going to do a brief demonstration of the app.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. Okay, I'm going to take you through a demonstration of our application, the GCM Advocacy Tool. This is a welcome page here. As you can see, it tells you a little bit about what the GCM does and how this tool will help them. If you can see here, it also has the option to translate it. I don't know if any of you know Bulgarian. We'll go back to English. Okay, so let's get started. Firstly, what this app is going to do, it's going to tell you there's some disclaimers. It's just for info purposes only. The translation is not 100% accurate, of course. It's just Google Translate. Except it's going to ask you what GCM objectives you're interested in. Not all users will actually have seen what the GCM objectives are, so we have a drop-down menu. You can see what they are here. Let's say you want to look at number 2. And then it's going to ask you, do you want to see the full text of the relevant human rights law, or just Article 1, or do you want to see what Article 1 actually says? Let's say, yeah, we do. And this is just going to generate a report. At the top here, you can say, download the report, choose the language again, but we'll keep it in English. Here we have the report for the relevant international law for GCM objective number 2. You can see here, this is a shortened version in the table format. You can see all of these articles which correspond with that objective. Yeah, this was like a lot of legal research. And then we have the full text here available in a drop-down format and additional resources at the bottom. So this is full text here. We put this in here because we wanted it to be sort of more helpful than just looking at a table. We wanted it to be able to be like for people who didn't want to go back and forth and look at every single article in the legislation. They can just print this entire thing off. And when they go into a meeting with the relevant government organizations, they can just have this here all ready for them to go. So next, I'm going to talk about the technical side of it and how we got to our app. So first off, we started with a database in Excel. We used Excel because in Neoda it would have been too hard to have over 400 different entries. So we had this database and we could all collaborate and put our own little columns into it. Then we use a VLOOKUP function in Excel. And so in Excel, we can just put in a number on the first spreadsheet and it'll come up with the relevant articles. Then we link this to Neoda with their function, and we had all the different variables here. And the variable at the top is the input as to what they specified, the objective they're interested in. And these variables here are spit out on the report.
So one problem we came into with using the spreadsheet function was that this doesn't look good, it's not legible, so we had to use some stellar sheets using a bit of coding like that. I haven't used coding since probably making a GeoCities website or coding for a MySpace page, so this was all very new, but it worked out in the end. We even got like a little background color thing when you hold it over. Then we integrated Google Translate, just a bit of script, uploaded the Java to the notice system. And we used it as a text object, which you could just put on any single bit of the page that you wanted to translate. Okay, I'll hand it over to Joel.
So in this section of our presentation, I'll be discussing our end user as well as the user testing conducted. As Simon touched on earlier, the app is being developed for the members of the Migrant Forum in Asia, which consists of a regional network of non-governmental organisations, associations, trade unions and individual advocates in Asia who are committed to protecting and promoting the rights and welfare of migrant workers. According to the DTP, this application is intended to help these advocates identify migrant workers' rights and protections when petitioning governments on migration issues. Admittedly, it has been a difficult journey in gaining a clear understanding of our end user and our application's value proposition. We were initially confused as to whether the end user was going to be a highly experienced international human rights lawyer or a community worker with limited exposure to international agreements and treaties. We later discovered that the end user would in fact include a wide range of people with varying levels of legal knowledge, English proficiency and expertise. Our interactions with the DTP also indicated that for some users of the application, it may be the first time that they have seen anything regarding the GCM. It became clear to us that we're being faced with quite a diverse user group. Now, in recognition of this diversity, it became integral to ensure that our app catered for a broad set of characteristics, which we sought to achieve by simplifying the language used and the interface. Turning now to our user testing, I preface that our ability to reach out to members of the Migrant Forum in Asia was limited. So as a substitute, we tested our application with a range of students, friends, family, work colleagues, and a human rights lawyer, each with various levels of expertise and knowledge. And you can see some of the feedback on screen. What became clear through this user testing was that users wanted an application that was easy to understand and navigate. In response to this, we sought to ensure that the application provided adequate and sufficient information throughout, including testing that all our hyperlinks work and are relevant, and creating an additional resources section at the end of our report that is clear and concise. This was all in addition to us creating a simple and easy to understand instructions document, intended to guide the user through the tool in the most efficient and accommodating way possible. We also tested the quality of our language translation with proficient Greek, Italian, Spanish and Portuguese users, and received feedback that in some instances, the translation was not precise but overall was sufficient. In light of this, we ultimately recognized that we are limited in being able to control the translation quality of Google Translate, and future improvements could include line-by-line language translations to ensure accuracy. As a final point, we also thought to ensure that the application worked on multiple browsers and interfaces, taking into the account the fact that users will not always be accessing the application via desktop or laptop. We were able to achieve this by using the function in Safari that allows you to view the website under the lens of different interfaces. I will now hand over to Petra, who will discuss challenges and issues.
So we faced a number of challenges in building this product, which everyone did, no doubt. The first for us is just the sheer volume of research that was involved. The numbers and the spreadsheet, it's a little bit overwhelming. We're not human rights experts yet. So, and another issue was, in a perfect world, I think NGOs would have bottomless pits of funding and could have provided some support for the legal research component. But we ended up just dividing the work between us, and when we were reviewing it for consistency, the subjectivity of the research task became really apparent. So here we've just got, two people accidentally did the same convention and ended up with different results. And the solution, we can't really do more than what we've done, but the solution that we came up with was to integrate the Excel worksheet in a way that allows it to be edited and updated and so our clients can update it later and without having to learn the whole Neota logic platform. So another problem was the broad scope of the project. And can I go back to the other slide? Oh no, yeah, I've just got one point I left off. So another problem that we faced was how to present the information in a coherent way that was digestible. As you saw, the report is really, really extensive. We have an option just to download a short report, which has a quick reference, but also the long extended report that people can print off and take to meetings and have a reference there with them. But yeah, the scope of the project was a challenge. So firstly, as Joel mentioned, the diverse profile of the end user made it really difficult to tailor the app functions to, the particular needs of a particular group, because we've got an experienced human rights expert on one hand and a community worker on the other, so they have very, very different needs. That was quite difficult, so we ended up with quite a simple app, but the benefit of that is that it can be shared widely, which is the priority for our client. We also didn't have a lot of contact with our, the end user. So our client is the diplomacy training program. The Migrant Forum Asia are a partner of DTP, and the advocates that are going to be using our product are members of Migrant Forum Asia. So there's a few degrees of separation there, which was a bit difficult, but we just sort of adopted, ran off made some assumptions about the profile of the users and ran off that. And now Sayun will talk about the future.
So in this final part of the presentation, I'll just be briefly canvassing some of the ways that we could improve on our app and expand on it in the future. So there are three suggestions that we would like to put forward. So firstly, we could incorporate another layer where we find the output by the country that the user is lobbying against. So this will be useful because not all governments would have ratified the human rights conventions and the ILO conventions that we have listed. And tailoring the information presented to respond more specifically to the individual advocate needs would be a great way to further focus the utility of the app that we have. So the idea is that we ask them a question like this: against which government are you advocating or lobbying? And the output, the table at the end, would separate out the treaties that the country has ratified and are legally bound by, and list separately those that they are not ratified and are not bound by. So this will also save time by eliminating the need for the user to double check the ratification status for each country manually, which is what is currently available on our app via a link to the UN website and the ILO website. So another potential layer is to refine the objectives by categories or themes. So instead of being confronted with a full list of 23 GCM objectives to choose from, which the user will have to read through in order to find what they're interested in, we ask them a question like this: what kind of advocacy are you engaged in? So if you're a human rights lawyer working in a specific field such as protecting migrants' economic rights, you can choose that option, and the next screen will take you to a much shorter and more tailored list of GCM objectives to choose from. So you don't have to read through and scroll down to number 22 to find the objective related to portability of social security entitlements, for example. Of course, the difficulty in trying to divide up the 23 objectives and list them on each specific themes is part of the reason why we did not go down this route in our app. The DTP indicated when we mentioned this option that such a thing would, at the very least, require the approval of MFA and maybe even the UN. But this is one of the potential ways that we can see the app being made more user-focused in the future. So a final avenue of improvement that we suggest is to present more options for outputs. So keeping in mind the characteristics of the user and also the global nature of the GCM, one of the features we considered was presenting the report in different languages. So Joel talked about testing the app in Google Translate and that being kind of workable. But keeping in mind the limitations of Google Translate, an alternative is to build a separate spreadsheet containing the treaty text in a different language and upload it onto the platform. So most of the human rights treaties are of course available in the official languages of the UN, so Arabic, Chinese, French, Russian, and Spanish. And I'm sure there are a lot of other authoritative translations that we can hunt down on the internet. So having the option to generate a report in multiple languages might be useful since a lot of our users will have English as a second language. And sorry, I know the time. Lastly, we could include an option to email the report to the user. And this can be very convenient if you're on a mobile device, for example, and have trouble downloading the Word or the PDF report. We left out this function in our app because of the privacy implications it raised, especially with most of our users based overseas and being lawyers or human rights advocates. But depending on where the app goes in the future, we see this option as a potential function we could include. Thank you.
Questions? Yes?
So I've got a question about the languages and translation. So you say one of your end users advocates for migrants from Asia. So I guess that maybe like Asian languages are more like applicable in this context. And however, like as you mentioned, that most of the translation you guys testing are basically European languages. So I want to know why didn't you guys choose like Asian languages?
So the previous slide, this is an example of the kind of languages that are easily accessible on the UN website. Of course, there are other authoritative translations that will be available, for example, on the Japanese government's for Ministry of Foreign Affairs website, for example. But this was beyond the scope of our current build, which is why we included it as a potential future option.
And I suppose for further context, when we did do our consultation, that we did get a feedback that most of the, if not all the users, would have English as a second language, but with varying degrees of understanding. So as long as we were able to potentially translate the instructions and that sort of thing into a barely legible Google translation format, I think that at least served one of the purposes that they wanted when they gave us the brief.
And I got a follow-up question. Also it's about the users, especially if you're targeting at community workers. So from my understanding, most of the community workers, they don't have much access to like internet or technology to some extent, but they have their smartphones usually. And then like I guess like most of them, they don't know English very well, so they even can't read the first page. So maybe they even don't know how to click on the select language tab to choose the translation. So that's something I'm concerned about.
Yeah, it's a really good point. The brief that we did get from our client though said that the users will have English as a second language. It might not be excellent, but they'll have that as a base sort of level. But also it's one of the difficulties of not having access to our user and also having to appeal to such extreme profiles of user. Because by catering to one, you can run the risk of alienating the other. So we try to write everything in really plain English, which works better for translations as well. But yes, I agree. I think one thing that we learnt from this project is that having one product for everyone doesn't necessarily work. And if you can target the scope of the user, you're then able to better accommodate their sort of needs and requirements.
Can I also add one thing that we did was we created an instructions document, so it would show you how to click the language options and click through. So that's something we thought about in our diverse user group, was to create that instructions document at the beginning, which will show up on the front screen, and then you can download that option and see how to use the app.
I really like the way you spent a lot of time thinking about the user, even though it's hard to get it.
Yeah.
You guys
Yeah.
I also like the fact that you did a VLOOKUP I say the young lawyer. You have to at least be able to do a VLOOKUP. I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know what I'm talking about, like just at least do a VLOOKUP. So I think it's good.
Yeah. Well done.
Yes.
How did you get the short versions of the texts?
That was
we did that. So and if you're a highly experienced human rights lawyer, you might pick up on a few errors, but don't worry because you can just edit the Excel spreadsheet and upload it. But the short articles were, our client wanted us to include the key right that article spoke to. So, but there's a lot of subjectivity involved in narrowing that down as well.
How many articles were there that you had to summarize?
Like
586.
586.
You thought you were doing that.
Don't forget
Thanks for noticing.
It's more on Ipsum, I reckon.
Yeah. Well done.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll see you later. Are you saying it's... Are you saying...
Okay, we have our final group who have done an app for the Kingsford Legal Centre. So, you guys need any...
Yeah, we're just going to log on first.
Log on, so you need me to bring the screen to that. And you need the clicker? You're good? Excellent. Okay, whenever you're ready.
Welcome. This is UNSW. Like most Australian universities, UNSW is comprised of just over a quarter international students. And it's really just a hallmark of our multiculturalism. Meet you. You is a first year engineering student studying at UNSW, and she pays $200 a week for rent and around $100 a week for living expenses. And she works at 2 different restaurants. Each of those restaurants pay her $11 an hour in cash. And so as a result, she has to work around 30 hours a week in order to make ends meet. On top of all of this, she's struggling a little bit with coursework because her English isn't the strongest, and she's having a tough time. And so underpayment of international students at UNSW is a real problem. In a recent report by Pacina, Farben, and also Laurie Berg, 738 international students were surveyed about their employment, and it was found that 38% of those students were paid less than $30 an hour, and 49% of the Asian students were paid less than $30 an hour. To give a little bit of context, $18 an hour is about the minimum wage in Australia. But the most incredible point that was in this report is that only 4.5% of those students have actually tried to claim those unpaid wages. And this really brings us to the core of our app, Paycheck. So tonight, we'll take you through our app and our journey that we took to get here. So I will be going through the key problem that our clients, Bassina and the Kingsford Legal Centre, KLC, brought to us and which our app tries to solve. And following that, Lucy will be going through how our app works and also the underlying market research. Samantha will go through the design principles and some of the constraints we face. And Rachel will be going through the actual building of the app, and Annie will go through some of the user feedback and how the future of our app might look. And so our problem is that underpaid international students aren't really reclaiming what they're owed. And research has shown that the main reason for this is because they don't know what to do about it. So really this is a problem about finding that available help is a bit hard for them to access. And that's just about a bit better marketing and a bit better language barriers. And so our client KLC actually can help them. And their usual process is over here. Firstly, they have to decide which award. There's lots of different awards that apply to different employees in each industry. Secondly, they have to calculate the wage that the employees actually owe, and so they have to take into account the different situations and different pay rates that are listed out in the award, and that's fairly complex. And finally, they help a bit with enforcement in front of the employer. So the choke point for KLC right now is actually calculating the wage. It actually takes 16 hours for them to do this. This is a long time, and our app aims to cut down on this time and also enable better access for international students to the underpayment help that is available. Lucy will take you through that.
Thank you, Angus. So after distilling the problem, we really identified the core needs of our key stakeholders, being the migrant workers and the KLC solicitors. So for the students, what they really prioritise is a tool that they can trust, a tool that's informative, that's intuitive, and preferably in their own language. Therefore, they'll prioritise functionalities such as usability, accessibility, and also sound legal coverage. Whereas for the lawyers, on the other hand, they want a tool that is effective and efficient, a tool that really automates the manual calculation process. So they would really value functionalities that would improve the automation, and it will give them an output to help them provide the advice. So with these needs in mind, we created Paycheck.
Introducing Paycheck. As you can see in this demonstration, it is an intuitive calculator that helps workers identify their wage entitlements under Australian law. Paycheck automates the calculation process. Paycheck will generate a downloadable report with a detailed breakdown of what workers should be paid. They can take the report to KLC, which will assist the solicitors in providing advice. Paycheck incorporates the following special features to enhance the user experience: Chinese translations, explanations, special warnings, links to external resources, validations, and web application. The simplistic but informative design seeks to empower migrant workers and aid KLC solicitors in combating wage exploitation.
So Paycheck really addresses the gap in the existing wage calculator market. So through our competitor analysis, we identified two key competitors: PACT, which is done by the Fair Work Ombudsman, and Outflank, a web-based application. So how does it really compare? Well, both apps has its own advantages and disadvantages. So starting off with PACT, it covers the field as it allows the user to find their award and to calculate the pay. However, it's very technical and it's filled with legal jargon, which is really difficult to understand, especially when the migrant workers have English as a second language. The second, Outflank, it's almost too comprehensive, which seems a bit counterintuitive. But from the feedback that we receive from KLC solicitors, this can lead to overwhelming information, which is a barrier to access for the migrant workers, therefore they often don't want to use this. So how does Paycheck compare? Well, Paycheck was really designed with the needs of our stakeholders in mind. We really focused on refining the user experience so that it's intuitive and it's simple, but most of all, it can generate a report which can support the advice-giving process by the KLC solicitors. Now, although we acknowledge that our legal coverage is a bit limited currently, but it can be scaled up into the future. So we really believe that Paycheck is the start for breaking down the barriers of access and really help fight exploitation.
Thanks, Lucy. Our core aim is to make this app intuitive and easy to use for international students, and also reduce the time that it takes employment lawyers to calculate the number of hours that a student has worked. In one project management workshop, Peter Dobkins from G&T drilled in the importance of understanding the triple constraints of time, resources, and scope and quality. These three constraints help to guide and consolidate our app's key features. In terms of time constraints, our key contacts at KLC were quite busy. However, we overcame this by scheduling in meetings with them and emailing them questions. Similarly,
Despite team members having multiple commitments, we utilised various forms such as WeChat calls, Google Hangouts, and physical group meetings to ensure that everyone was kept in the loop. And lastly, due to time constraints, we were only able to test our app with 28 people. In terms of resources constraints, due to our technical capabilities, we constantly asked ourselves, is this app too difficult for us to translate in easy form? Additionally, in terms of, we were also constrained by our language abilities, and this affected how much we could translate. So thus, our app is limited to Chinese at this point in time. And lastly, structured data. As any well-integrated, high-level legal expert system requires high-quality data, this requires a lot of resources in order to build up. However, despite these roadblocks, we decided to get back to the basics and also think with simplicity in mind. So as we only had 2 months to define our specifications and to build and test our application, we decided to make our app small and scalable. So that's why we targeted international students, and we also limited our app to casual workers in the food and beverage industry with a grade 1 classification. That is, those that picked up glasses and also removed food plates. So why did we choose to target Chinese students in particular? We justified this as we found out from a report by Bassina from KLC that Chinese student workers were the most likely to be underpaid, with 75% of them receiving less than $15 an hour. So these constraints right here helped us to consolidate our app features. So how did we make our app intuitive? We wanted to streamline the user experience by providing hover buttons and Chinese translations. We also made it both informative for both the student by providing them with links to government websites if they didn't know their modern award, as well as giving them a breakdown of their pay. And we also made it informative for employment lawyers by giving them a structured report so that they can take this to conduct further interviews with students. How did we make our app simple? We felt that if our app was too granular, it'll be too overwhelming for students to use. So thus, we used few questions and limited our app to only calculate 1 financial year. And lastly, how did we make our app flexible? We gave users the option to choose a pay period from 1 day to 1 month. And also, lastly, our app is very malleable for KLC to build upon.
Thanks, Sam. So how did we go about designing our app? So we started off by researching the law. Now, as I mentioned before, we had to really narrow our scope because the law in this area is pretty overwhelming. There are a bunch of awards available in a bunch of different classifications. So we used Bassina's research and we talked to KLC and we narrowed it down to the restaurant industry award because we felt that that was the one that a majority of students would be using. And so even within that award itself, it's about 50 pages. So we went through the whole award as a team and we picked up all of the relevant elements, and we found out that there are different rates for different job classifications, different rates for different time periods of the day, and also different rates for weekends and public holidays. So there's a whole scheme in there. And also with overtime, it's a very complex area of law, and we talked to KLC and we found out that the law isn't even settled in this area because there's so many different interpretations. So we just flag it as an issue and we let the solicitors make the decisions. Also, there's an issue with the rates updating every financial year, so we have to ensure that the app is kept up to date. In terms of the logic, we initially really wanted to make it nice and streamlined, allowing people to just input their start times and their end times for the shifts, and the app would just automatically categorize into the different time periods. But we tried linking an Excel spreadsheet to Neota and it didn't work out very well, so the best that we could do was the one on the right where users have to categorize their own hours on their own, which isn't great for usability, but it also serves as an educational tool because users now understand the nuances between the different timings and the different rates that they get paid. Besides the fact that we couldn't link our Excel spreadsheet, we also had to continuously debug different things like reports not working or numbers not adding up. It was all just a process of experimentation. Yeah, you're nodding in the back there, I can see that. Process of experimentation and literally just trial and error to see what worked. And it was just, well, we just used the Neota user manual and we just tried it all out and then we managed to fix those issues, but we still haven't managed to make the public holiday rate work, so users have to manually calculate it at the moment. it just goes to show that we can have a great design in mind, but the execution might not necessarily follow through because we have technical limitations. Okay, in terms of user experience, we had the design with international students in mind, so we made sure that we kept it to simple English, and we also have translations into languages like Mandarin. Ideally, we would have apps with different languages to make it a seamless experience instead of having the hover translations, which are a bit clunky. But otherwise, the app is pretty simple and straightforward to use and go through, so people with different levels of education and different levels of language capability can easily use it. And now Annie will take you through our user testing.
Thanks, Rachel. So following our build process, we began our user testing process. So due to our time constraints, we began by just creating a simple Google form, which asked users questions about the design of the app, the structure of the app, and also the difficulty of the use of the app. We then sent this form through to our stakeholders, UNSW students, as well as our friends. We understood that by testing with these individuals, they weren't our direct target demographics, so we could only really receive feedback that would be beneficial for the usability and the design of our application. So we received 28 responses, 85% were UNSW students, 11% were solicitors, and 4% were friends. Despite this limited pool of feedback that we received, we actually gained quite a bit of use from it. So one of the major points that we received was that our report at the final page was not downloadable. So we added both Word and PDF downloadable functions to our final report. Secondly, people found that our break inputs were quite confusing because they were split into 2 questions. We've now merged that into 1 question. And also, so in our welcome page, people weren't quite clear on who could use our application. We've now added more information, so it says paycheck is limited to casual employees classified as food and beverage attendant grade 1 under the Restaurant Industry Award. We found that these points of feedback were quite easy to implement, but what about the points of feedback that we couldn't change immediately? So given more time and more resources, our team feels that we would be able to automatically fully automate our pay calculator. This means that users won't need to manually break down their early morning hours, their ordinary hours, and their late evening hours. The app would just do that automatically. Furthermore, we would be able to include formulas and calculations for different age groups, also public holiday pay, overtime pay, as well as break pay. And finally, we would be able to also translate the entire application into Chinese, which we currently do not do. We feel like these changes would be implementable within a 1-year period. Also, due to the scalability of our application, we feel that within the year we would also be able to add further classifications under the Restaurant Industry Award, as well as begin looking at other modern awards in Australia. Furthermore, with more time, we'd also be able to conduct better user testing, particularly with our target demographic. This would mean that individuals like you would find greater benefit in using Paycheck.
Back to you.
So, in conclusion, on behalf of our group, thank you for coming on this journey with us. Over the past few months, we feel like we've learned quite a lot, especially in the difficulty in transforming a vision into an actual product. Furthermore, we feel that the simplest apps to use are probably the hardest ones to create.
Yes.
So in your user limitation section, you mentioned that only people who are in food and beverage industry classified as grade 1 under the Restaurant Something Ladder Award should be using it. Like, I've worked in hospitality before and I have no idea what grade I was. How would you expect international students who may not be very good at English to be able to know this information?
So in terms of like the grade 1 classification, so on our front page we have hovers that they can hover over in Chinese translations as well to tell them the different, all the different categories that needs to be satisfied in order for grade 1. So for instance, like picking up glasses, removing food plates, receiving money, so they can use our hovers and
to make it more informative kind of decision whether they fit in.
To add to that, also when we were speaking to Kingsfield Legal Centre, we really had to narrow the scope of our app build because there are just so many different job classifications and so many different awards. We felt that we really had to keep it just to the calculation portion. So ideally, individuals would be using this application after they've already determined what they are, which could be through seeing a solicitor or also using the PACT function from the Fair Work Ombudsman.
Yeah, and I think in relation to that, we recognise that due to the limitations of the scope, we didn't make it a closed system. So then it actually links you out to other resources that you can seek to find out what your award is. So I think we kind of tried to cover the field in terms of that way. Yes?
Yeah, I think very well done. It's a very hard thing to do. This is like the topic for the hackathon, I think, from Justice Connect, doing this exact same thing. Spent 2 days trying to do it myself. It was really quite hard in terms of using an expert system to provide any sort of value. I wondered how do you say that, like in terms of delivering the app, is it for the solicitors at KLC to use as just a calculation tool, or is it for users at home? Because as you said, there are so many limitations in terms of knowing your award, and even like for the person who's working to know what days they worked, and have a record of that to be able to put that into their system. It seems who would be using this at the end of the day?
So we designed the system to be used by the user, but when we conceived this app, we sort of thought that the user would be going to the Kingsfield Legal Centre to get a bit of advice first, and then they could then take the app home and then input the dates themselves. There are some difficulties with sometimes employees don't give pay slips, things like that. But yeah, that's just something that's difficult in any situation.
Yeah, and I think to add on to that is it's almost integrated in the name itself. It's a paycheck. So even if they didn't go and see Kingsfield Legal Centre or any other community legal centre in the beginning, a lot of the research has shown that they've been dramatically underpaid. So even if you don't account for the allowances or whether or not they've been paid after a break, just by actually putting in this thing to have an idea of what they should be paid, for them to be realising, oh wow, I'm severely underpaid, or that's not the amount that I received. It's an indication for them to take action as well.
Congratulations, I think that was really good. And I've heard employment lawyers complain a lot about how difficult calculating underpayments is. Is there a reason that you chose to have the user as the employer or employee, as opposed to the lawyer?
So I guess speaking to Kingsfield Legal Centre as well, a part of the issue is that with appointments they have to bring in so much, pay slips and data on their phone or text messages and things like that. It would be simpler for the user to input everything that they have at home, where they're comfortable and able to access everything. And it sort of avoids the situation where they forget to bring something, have to book another appointment, and the lawyer to input everything for them.
And so adding on to that, we also have an I don't know function. So if they don't know what pay period they want to choose from, it directs them to another link where they can use another website to to calculate the
And to kind of start tracking gather all the time.
I think it's an amazing effort to do here, because this is like this whole area is possibly a really huge business. Like there's legal tech business in this. I think Australia has something like 160 different award categories. The next in the world is like France with 150 or something, and then everyone else is about 10. It's like Australia's the most complex industrial system, and I know some people trying to build businesses on it, because the other side of it, the other interesting flip side is there's reputable employers who want to make sure they're not breaking the law. And then there's some that are trying to remedy things, so like the 7-Eleven issues and all of that. There's technology people trying to sell to them so they can run that through their payroll systems to make sure they're not breaching stuff. And once you get outside of food and you get into like the awards in a place like Caltex would face it, like if someone goes into a fridge during their shift, then they get a loading, and then it's so complex. But you made a really good start.
Okay, we might wrap up just because I'm conscious.
One more question.
Okay, one more.
All right. Pressure. Do you have any insight? You said that it's about 16 hours for the lawyers to figure out how much time the employees spent. Do you have any insight into how much of that 16 hours is because people don't have good records or they don't remember versus just actually doing the calculations?
I think in terms of the insight that we have, I think it's like a multifaceted problem, and that's why we wanted it to be user-facing for migrant workers. I think in terms of that, as we went through the award, it was super complex to see like what time do they start their break, and then depending on when they started their break, how long it would be. So I think not only the calculation, but also figuring that out. And in this area, because it's so complex, a lot of people just receive cash on hand, they get a text message, they get things like that. So I'm sure everything that you've identified falls into the greater problem. So I think that's why I kind of wanted it to be usable by both the migrant workers, but also the solicitors, so that they can kind of counterbalance both.
Yeah. Building on that, when we were speaking to Kingston Legal Centre, I think we didn't actually narrow and break down what the 16 hours was for, but a lot of it I think was that they didn't have a set mechanism for doing the calculation, so every time they encountered a client that did need help, they would have to start from scratch, maybe start a new Excel spreadsheet and things like that. So I would imagine that took up a lot of the 16 hours.
Yeah. And lawyers doing maths is always
we feel that pain.
The next one you should do is Legal Services Awards for when you're paralegal.
Yeah, we have,
It's 2.5 times on public holiday.
yeah, we have anecdotal experience from that area. Okay, well, thank you very much.
I certainly think that it's a fabulous group of students. They've put in a huge amount of time and energy into this, in amongst all of their other subjects and work. But I told them at the beginning, this sort of a subject, it takes them outside their comfort zone. They have to go a lot more than just sort of reading your classic case books and answering questions that they're used to answering and have been answering throughout law school, and think about these problems completely differently. They've done that brilliantly. I think every single student who presented today deserves a special round of applause. So thank you everyone. I'd also like to thank all of you for coming. We're not finishing yet. I just wanted to, some people might need to go from a timing perspective. It's really great to have an audience to present to. It makes it a lot more fun for the students. It makes it a lot more fun for me. And we're really grateful to everybody. So just thanks everyone for coming. And what we're going to do now is give our judges some time to confer and make a very difficult decision. We have the prizes, as I said, for the winning group. If you do have to go and be somewhere else, please have a drink, have something to eat, and then go if you need to. Stay if you want to see who won. Fingers crossed, and get that final bit at the end. But either way, thank you for coming and being here tonight. We have our decisions. So first of all, before we do the main prize from our judging panel, Kenji Yamada from Neota is presenting a social media prize.
So I guess what we really enjoy about the course and working with great people like Larry and UNSW is providing law students and future lawyers with skill sets that are relevant for today and for the future. And one of the things we wanted to help promote and encourage was social media and sort of being able to create sort of branding, and so we had a little social media prize, and we have a beautiful hamper for the winner. So I'd like to present the prize to Samantha Wong.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and well done. And now, I don't even have anything to announce. It has to be announced by the judges, because I don't know who it is.
Right.
Over to our judges.
So this is going to be a staged process. I'm just going to actually firstly thank you for those wonderful presentations. We are gobsmacked and amazed by the level of sophistication and commitment to these projects. Sam is going to give you a bit more information about how we judged it, and then the decision will come from Julian. But thank you, we feel very privileged to be part of this process.
You guys did it. You each took your turns. Firstly, thanks very much for letting us as a firm be involved and help to bring this to you. We are very privileged to be in that position, very proud of what we've seen today. We think learning these skills is so crucial to your futures and your careers as lawyers, and it's fantastic. Very well done on what you've done in this class and the university putting it on, because these are these extra skills as well as the deep legal research and legal analysis that you do that come together to make a complete lawyer of the future. So fantastic to see where that's heading in. And it is that combination of deep legal thinking, and we saw it up there today. You have to pull apart an award or a human rights convention to get to your app. How we could judge this, it's really hard. There's so many different criteria. And one of the things we had in mind was you were all given your challenge. So we couldn't judge on, for example, which one has the most market potential or which one could be implemented the most easily. Those sort of things were outside your control. So we take that into account with it, because there could be lots of different ways. Like the one that perhaps you could see getting into the most users' hands most quickly would be probably the last one, because you could pick a pretty good audience and you could find them and you could market to them really easily. If you sort of think of which one's going to make kind of the enormous differences on a social justice level globally, then 2 or 3 could be in that. Number 1, you had sort of so much creativity in the way it was presented and the way it engaged, particularly people of your age group and everything. So there's so many different criteria. What we were looking at perhaps overall is the extent that the legal research that went into it. We're looking at the use of the platform and how deep you got into the way you could push that, the way you presented today, the way you pulled it all together, and the story that you told. And I think the other thing, which you all had aspects of, but also the way in which you thought about the user. Sometimes you couldn't actually solve it, but the way it was apparent throughout that you started with a user in mind. And I think that's really important, and it's a big learning for everything that you do, actually, even right down to the basics of if you were writing a legal research memo or an advice to a client. Who is this client? What do they want to do with it and all that? So that applies to everything, but really in this world it does. And all the aspects of that. So we tried to jumble all those together. It doesn't really matter who wins, although when we announce it, you'll scream and shout. It doesn't really matter because you've all done incredibly well. So Julian, over to you.
Thank you. I did suggest we do a We Are the Champions rendition in this group, but that didn't get popular support. So, look, I just want to echo the comments. I think you've all done a great job. I know it's a lot of work. One of the things we're really proud of is the finished product, and also looking forward to hopefully seeing some of the apps used, with clients and used in a production sense. So that's really important to us, and well done again. So the winner, and as Sam said, it's a very difficult decision. There was a lot of discussion about who the winner was, and there was a lot of thinking about the criteria that we used to judge. But I'll just announce the winner as AppSig.
Well done.
So much.
Congratulations. Thank you. Congratulations. We need to have a sponsors photo.
Well done.